Hi Sergio, how are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Cool. Today we're going to talk about commissions and rewarding employees. Why is it important, Sergio?
I think it's one of the biggest costs for most of the companies, and I believe it's currently under optimized for most of them. So it's one of the biggest potential levers for growth, and it's not currently being properly used.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because commissions and rewarding people, it steers behavior. For me, it is really connected with the revenue strategy and how to drive your go-to-market. Why did you come up with that solution? Because you're the CEO and the founder of Remuner. So why did you decide to, okay, we need to solve this issue?
So prior to Remuner, I was COO of another digital company in the digital signature space, and there I suffered that pain. We had
Hmm.
150 people in the, let's say, go-to-market area with 17 different comp plans. It was super complex to manage. I had my own RevOps team spending countless hours on that, and I
Yeah.
was super frustrated because I felt that the biggest variable cost of the company was owned by me, but I was doing a very poor job in optimizing it and really making sure that those costs and that money that I was throwing every month on that plan, on that scheme, was actually producing the results and the behaviors and the incentives and the motivation that I wanted. So I was very frustrated by that, and that's kind of the origin of Remuner. Once we founded Remuner, the whole vision is how do I help others in my position, and how do I create the tool that I wish I would have had at that
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that you say, okay, I, as the CEO, I had a problem because you do have RevOps, you do have CFOs. Just to throw something out to play devil's advocate, why you, as a CEO, would you be bothered by having people doing their job, spending 8 or 10 or 40 hours to get the commissions right? Why is it bothering you?
So I had three kind of problems. I had one problem on the sales organization, which were always complaining about commissions.
Hmm.
And at some point, I was like, I don't understand why these guys are complaining if we're paying them based on their job. But the reality is that they didn't have the right visibility, transparency. They normally got the results of what they're going to be paid once the period, month or quarter has ended. So it was not super efficient for them, and it was actually creating more distrust, dismotivation, lack of transparency, and there were a lot of discussions at every end of the month. So that was one side of the problem. Then I had my own RevOps team,
Yeah.
spending countless hours on manually calculating things on Excel, dealing with different discussions back and forth for every single month with individuals, with managers, and everyone was unhappy. And then on top of that, I had my own problem as a
Hmm.
COO, and my problem was what I described before. I was feeling that commissions is the biggest investment of a variable investment of a company, but the same way that a CMO is trying to optimize the budget, we were doing a poor job in doing that and really aligning on objectives and incentives. So I thought the biggest cost in my company should create the right incentives, motivation, and behavior, and instead of that, is creating operational hassle on my teams, discomfort, distrust, and a lot of discussions on my sales teams. And that's something that I should be worried about as COO. And that was
Hmm.
my main concern and my main pain point when we actually came up with the idea of Remuner.
Yeah, I really love it, and especially when you say as CEO, you're working on fulfilling the mission of the company, basically, right? Um, and on the other side, you see a lot of startup founders, B2B tech founders. That's okay. Listen, let's reward people based on the revenue, and then you have monthly, quarterly, or annual commissions. Um, when you start designing a commission plan, maybe what are some go-to things you have to pay attention to?
I think whenever you are trying to design a comp plan, you really need to think, what are my goals as a company? When you create a comp plan, whatever scheme you use, you are actually creating some incentives that will drive behavior of your team.
Hmm.
Some of those incentives might be obvious, some of them might not be so obvious based on the schemes that you create in place. So what you want to do is have those individual incentives and behaviors that you are creating on purpose or maybe by accident with your comp plans be completely aligned with what you want as a company.
Yeah.
And what you want as a company and your company goals might vary from time to time. And it needs to be like this. Every company is changing their priorities every time. So the first thing that I would recommend when you start thinking about compensation plans is what do I want to achieve as a company this month, quarter, or year? What are the goals that I want to achieve? And then based on those goals, then let's think, how do I incentivize and motivate those teams to actually drive their behavior towards those same goals?
Mhm. And if you start with the revenue, what would then maybe be a second element to add in a commission plan?
So depending on the moment of the company, there's companies in which revenue growth is the number one priority, and they're not so worried about, let's say, unit economics profitability. But there's other companies, and especially more and more these days, you want to grow, but you want to grow sustainably. And that
Yeah.
means acquiring the right customers at the right time, at the right price, for instance, or having customers that will retain over time. So there's always secondary KPIs or indicators that you want to incentivize on, but those really depend on the nature of your business. There's not a playbook that you can apply to every company. And let me
Yeah.
say that the same company, the same moment, with the same team, same products, and sales cycle, same market, with two different goals, they should apply different compensation plans. So
Mhm.
the most important thing is what you want to achieve as a company. And you say revenue, but revenue, it's just a generic word, but you want a revenue growing at 3x per year, regardless of the unit economics, or you want to grow revenue at, I don't know, 70% with a CAC to LTV ratio of 3.5 or whatever. But there's more things to take into account than just revenue, which is the probably most obvious one.
Yeah.
But you need to consider as being a COO, founder, CFO, driving those compensation plans. You wanna think, okay, revenue, but under what conditions, and does it revenue at any cost work for me or not? And then decide
Mhm.
based on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. And I started, okay, what would you add at the same time? I've had commission plans with maybe 10, 15 different variables. You can't go too far. It's a dragon of a commission plan. So what if you are too far and have to go back to make it more easy to understand for the sales rep? What are some guidelines you can give there? Because you can go on profitability, you can work on the 3.5 times CAC and so forth. But what are like maybe some guidelines you can give?
Yeah, some compensation plans that I see often with companies is, as you described, a lot of metrics. And
Hmm.
what you need to consider is, when you're creating a comp plan, you are trying to create behaviors on these guys. The more complex you make it, even though they understand and they have full visibility because they use tools like us that provide it, the more complex it is, the more difficult for them is to actually be or understand what is the behavior that is expected from them. So what I would say is, if you think you are in that situation, rethink about your company goals and then make the exercise of translating that into things that are very intuitive for these guys.
Yeah.
I was discussing the other day with a customer that they wanted to create an incentive on revenue, but they were creating a super complex scheme with bonuses, tiers, and so on. And I told them, why don't you just go back to the simple percentage of sales? And
Yeah.
their worry was, yeah, but then I might be paying more than what I expect, and so on. And my point is, maybe you need to create some rules around how you pay those percentage of sales so that you make sure that your commission line, that your cost is aligned with what you expect.
Hmm.
But do not expect your sales team to make the math in their head to translate your super complex bonus scheme into something that is understandable for them. Do that math on your side as a company and then give it super simple for them. You're going to get X% commission of your sales if you are above that number. And when you get to that limit, you're not getting anything else.
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
way, whenever they're talking with a customer, they completely understand and relate. Okay, if I'm selling that many thousand euros or dollars or pounds to this customer, I'm getting that percentage. If you make super simple for them to understand, this is my action, this is my reward, that's when you start really creating these incentives and those
Yeah.
behaviors.
Yeah. And plus, when it's too complex, people will start calculating how they can reach the easiest their target. And I've seen people just getting rid of high margin services because it was only 10% of their bonus they could gain. So I really think that that's an important one because it does drive behavior, even bad behavior, right? So when we talk about bad behavior, I was in companies where acquisition people, they got deals, and customer success or account management, they knew they were going to churn, and there was no way to claw back than those commissions. How do you look at clawbacks? How do you look at driving in a constructive way then certain behaviors?
Yeah, that again, I think depends a lot on the company. There's multiple ways in which you can track clawbacks or retention overall. There's one way that companies that are super focused during that period in retention, they include it, for instance, in the first commission rule, let's say. So you are not getting paid until the customer reaches whatever onboarding 3 months, 6 months, if they don't churn in 1 year. So it's already included in the first
Yeah.
moment. There's some of the companies that implement clawbacks in the month 3, 6, or even 1 year. So there's different ways. But what you really need to think about this is, if you as a company are worried about the retention of your customers, you should have a way to include those incentives and therefore create those behaviors in the acquisition guys. So retention is not only a matter of CS, in the same way that marketing or SDRs should also create meaningful opportunities for account executives. And that's something that you also need to introduce somehow in their compensation plan. You cannot simply pay SDRs based on discovery calls if you want them to drive quality opportunities. If you
Yeah.
just want them to drive volume, then that's fine. And that's why I always say it depends a lot on your momentum as a company and what you really want to achieve. But you always need to be aware that with the rules that you create behaviors. Sometimes they are obvious, sometimes they're hidden behaviors, like you said, and you really need to account for those. And that's why normally the simpler the better, and the those components that have a much clear link between action, reward, and those action and reward are super close in time. Those are the ones that normally drive the best behavior that you want as a company.
Yeah, and especially if you look at the outcomes, huh? Because if you look at so many discovery calls, it is just, I always said, a dumb metric, and it's just a number. But if you look at the quality, then it leads to completely different things. And there's some people in the market that say, okay, listen, we have marketing, we have sales, we have SDRs, we have CS. They all are aligned with the same goal. Would you then go as far as giving them one general number and then using this as the foundation of a commission plan? Or would you still prefer to have a separate, within the overarching goal, a separate target for marketing, separate for SDR, separate for CS, separate for sales? So how do you look at this?
Yeah, again, depending what you want to achieve. If you're a company in which you have those two teams completely working unaligned, one to the other, always blaming the other, and so on, it might be a good idea to include somehow this, let's say, team metric that tries to align everyone. But normally, it's typically good that you create specific targets for each of them, because again, if you give them like team revenue goal to an SDR, they do not see a clear link between their action and their reward, because they do
Yeah,
not see, obviously, what is my action that I do in the day to day and how I'm actually impacting that overall revenue that is actually creating my compensation for this month. So, depending on the situations, combining both things might be a good idea. But generally speaking, the more related to their daily activity is, the better incentive you're going to create. But it's true, sometimes you might need to create something more like team, overall company, and so on. But you just need to know that those kind of incentives do not drive immediate action by these guys. Those normally
yeah,
drive more collaboration between teams. So if what
yeah,
you want to achieve is collaboration between teams, then that's a good idea. If you want to more push for individual results as a team, sorry, as a function, so SDR, as account execs, it's better to put individual targets to these guys. And then
yeah.
you can also combine. And then there's the question of, okay, but how much do I combine? It's 50-50, 80-20. That always depends on the situation of your company. Another recommendation I can tell you is comp plans should not be static. Goals, as a company, your goals and your priorities change over time. So you should also be changing your compensation plans along the way to actually adapt it and make sure that those incentives are always aligned. And you cannot dramatically change compensation plans every month or every quarter, because that's disturbing for the teams. But doing some of those adjustments over time, and always keep that in mind, so that I always try to make the compensation plan aligned with the company, that's always a good idea to do.
Yeah, and for me, I think an easy way, rather than completely changing compensation plan, is to create campaigns with some temporary incentives. This will temporarily peak then the attention to the new product, and then later you can include it into a compensation plan, for example. Yeah.
Exactly. That's a good idea to use. You only need to know that whenever you normally, if you have a quarterly comp plan and you use an incentive for 15 days to launch a new product, normally those incentives are super well incentivized in the mean that they see clearly, I sell this product, I get whatever amount. So normally they go on top of their priority list, and normally they kind of forget of the others. If
Yeah.
that's your behavior, if that's what you want to achieve, then that's a great idea. And normally when you launch 15 days campaign, if you sell this product, you get, I don't know, 10% of, of whatever you sell. That really drives behavior and incentives and results. And that's also a proof that if you create the right schemes, the right compensation plans, you communicate them properly and they understand it, you really drive behavior and results.
Yeah, yeah. I love it. And then when you look at when we go back to setting the strategy for the year and then designing the comp plan, for me, strategy obviously is action driven. Traditionally, you have people the senior leadership, they go to an offsite, then decide the strategy, and then maybe the mid of February, people get the new compensation plan, the new incentives. What are for you like best practices to, in a smooth way, say like this is a strategy, this is how we're going to roll it out, and this is how we're going to execute on it without losing too much time on it?
I think for most of the times, and generally speaking, sales teams are much more worried about their own compensation plan than the overall company strategy. So they're much more
True.
worried about what is my quota, how much I'm going to get if I sell that much.
Yeah.
So normally what they're more worried about when you come at the beginning of the year and you present this is the new plan and your own compensation plan, what they worry about is try to quickly understand, okay, what do I need to do to actually maximize my return and
Hmm.
maximize my commissions. That's normally, as you said, what they're more worried about. So one good way or one best practice to use in this kind of scenarios, especially when you are tweaking or changing a little bit your compensation plans, is show them scenarios and
Hmm.
show them how this actually will translate. And a good practice as well is um, try to show them last year with data of the last year with this new comp plan you would have earned that much, for instance. That's a good example for them to quickly understand, because sometimes or most of the times they will go pessimistic and think, okay, especially if the company is not super proficient in managing commissions, but they might think these guys are changing this commission because they don't want me to earn that much money as last year. And when
Hmm.
you suddenly present scenarios, they actually
Yeah.
realize that no, maybe I'm even better incentivized, but I need to achieve that certain level, or I need to do or I need to achieve that result, and so on. And that's a best practice that I've applied, and I see dramatically the difference when you use those kind of scenarios when communicating commissions versus when you don't, and the kind of discomfort that you might create in your teams. Because at the end of the day, even though maybe it's not super uh, politically right to say, but that's what they are worried about,
Yeah.
much more than whatever speech the CEO might give at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, you receive the commission plan, there's this shock, then you have the people coming to you, hey, I'm gonna leave the company. So there's a lot of unrest that you create simply by by sending a way of rewarding people. So that's why for me the communication is extremely important, and that it's not just top-down driven, but they explain the why, the scenarios is a brilliant idea. But also that they are attainable. So scenarios is one idea, but I'm sure you probably have also seen that sometimes people they come with targets that are maybe a complete shift of what has been done previously, and the goals might not seem attainable, and that the scenarios they are all theoretical, and that nobody has ever achieved those scenarios. So how do you work with this? What are then ways to really to really make sure that the people see they are attainable?
Yeah, I think those scenarios that you're describing might be more common in companies that are in an early phase or an early stage, because they are launching new countries, new products, or they're even new as a company. And therefore, you don't have really enough information to actually understand whether your targets are actually reasonable or not. So I would say there's different ways to approach it. One way is similarly to what you would do on a ramp up process of a new person that is coming to your company. It's transparently communicate to your teams, we are all learning here. this is new. I'm not, as a company, willing to not pay anyone, because that's not a good scenario to be as a company if they've done their job. So maybe finding a way to create some sort of let's say floor or comfort or something like this in the same way that you would do with ramp ups is a good idea. That's one possible solution. The other one is, if you know you have a product market fit, and therefore you know that it's more about launching new countries, new products, and so on. There's always some kind of best practice ratios in terms of how much should a person earn based on what they bring to the company. And those ratios are
Hmm.
for new business. Let's say an account executive driving new business, they should be able to drive 3 to 5 times their fully loaded cost of a year. So that's another way to back off the envelope, let's say, check if your targets are reasonable. And for a person driving or managing an existing business, so CSM, account manager, whatever you call it, those guys should be able to handle a book of accounts that represent 8 to 10 times their fully loaded cost in terms of
Yeah.
amount of business. That's another
Yeah.
way that you can track how far you are. And those are best practices. The best practices, sorry, they do not always apply to all companies, but you can use that as a benchmark. If you are setting a target for an account executive that is driving new business that is 10 times their full loaded cost, you're probably off track. But that's more or less something that you can try to do. And here I'm talking always about tech companies, so selling software. If you're talking about companies or sales teams selling physical goods with a high COGS and therefore a gross margin that is not close to 80 or 90%, but that might be the SaaS, then those ratios you need to adapt it to the net revenue they're bringing.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
other than that, I think those are generally good benchmarks to have in mind and try to check if what you're doing is more or less aligned with that.
Yeah. And how then do you also take into account that your goal setting is in line with some criteria that people put in place? And like, okay, we say, okay, we have a good target setting if 65% of our people reach goals, but this then will also have an impact on commission. And then I'm talking about cliffs, then I'm talking about career pathing and so forth. So what is your opinion around this?
Yeah, I think that's super let's say subjective, and it depends a lot on the sales culture that you want to create in your company. My personal view is that you should get the vast majority of your team between 80 and 100% achievement, and you should count that into consideration so that those guys that they stay in that area, let's say in that range, they're well commissioned and they're earning what should be market standard, let's say. Those below 80%, you should be really reviewing if those persons are the ones that need to be in your team. And let's say that shouldn't be more than 15-20% of your team. And then
Hmm.
it's typically good that you have 1 or 2 people in the team, so around 10%, maybe 10-20%, that are above 100%. And
Yeah.
those, they get accelerators. And those accelerators, it's typically good that they are aggressive, so that those that are in the 80 and 100, they really want to push and get to that position. If you have 50% of your team above 100%, I would say the targets are low. If you have 50% of your team below 80%, either your targets are too high or your team is not, let's say, performing at what you should expect. But that's, again, super personal. That's my personal point of view. And if you want to create more, let's say, aggressive sales cultures, you might be a little bit less or you should give a lower range. If you want to create more comfort, let's say,
Hmm.
sales culture, and you are in a more established company, maybe you can increase that range. And I've seen companies even paying from 1% attainment, they already get commissioned on that sale. So that, I think, it
Yeah.
depends a lot on the culture of the company.
Yeah. Yeah, and what I have also seen is that when people move like from mid-market to enterprise, it's a different way of working, and they don't have those ramp up targets anymore because they're fully ramped up in the organization. So they might have a quite negative hit the first 6-12 months on their commission. First of all, do you have a solution? Does it exist? Do you have something to suggest around this? And secondly, what is your opinion around this?
What we did in Signature was treat a promotion like a ramp up. So if you would be promoted from the mid-market team to the enterprise team or something like this, or from inside sales to account executive, we would consider the same kind of concept of a ramp up. Normally, the ramp up of a promotion is smaller than a new hire that you bring on board, but we did also have this kind of ramp up to kind of accommodate during that phase. So generally speaking, that would be my recommendation. But you always need to understand really your company and what actually means moving from the mid-market to enterprise. Something that I've seen dramatically impacts this change is the sales cycles. Normally for mid-market, depending on a lot of things, but generally speaking, let's say sales cycle is around 3 months, while enterprise is more towards closer to 1 year. And that dramatically impacts commissions because when you are on a 3-month sales cycle, let's say, and you have a quarterly bonus or scheme or commission plan, the actions you make on a quarter, you get the reward super close in time, as I was explaining before. When you jump to enterprise, there's a lot of frustration sometimes in those people because they're used to having a much closer time gap between their job on the day-to-day and their reward. And that's something that you really also need to handle, manage, and sometimes set expectations in those promotions, because that's what I've seen is normally the biggest change in terms of how commission plans of the day-to-day affects in those sorts of promotions. Ticket sizes obviously change, but that's more or less in favor of their commission, so they don't typically take that as a negative sign.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for me, in any case, it is very important that there is something like Remuner, such a tool to really give overview where people are with their commissions, to make the link between the revenue strategy and the action, the execution, because it gives a clarity on the people. Where are we with the business goals? It helps coaching the people as well. Maybe one last thing then. So if I'm a startup founder, I have maybe 3-4 salespeople. Currently, my commission is the times 3, let me say 400K ARR they need to hit. How should I go from here? As I said.
What do you mean? How do you scale the compensation plan across your
Exactly.
team?
So so I'm a startup founder, 3-4 salespeople. Currently, my sales commission is 400K ARR, and that's it. We have currently one product. So how would you structure then, or advise to adjust the commission plan?
Yeah. So what I would say is, again, what are your company goals at the time? And probably if there are only 4 or 5 people, they're willing to scale. So there you can decide to put in place some incentives that are much more inclined towards growing. For instance, like having strong accelerators, like paying or having commission cycles that are shorter, like monthly even, or quarterly. So those are things that you can try to do. Sometimes in the account executives, there's companies that differentiate what is the let's say the accrual of the earnings of the commission and the payment. So I would advise in that situation, make it short. It's obviously a risk that you're assuming as a company, but that's at the expense of growth. So those are maybe things that you want to do. And then once this company starts to grow, eventually those account executives will be split between account execs and account managers. And normally at the beginning, they cover the full cycle. So you will start specializing your team as you grow. And I think in that particular point in time is where you really need to think what we were discussing before. Do I want to still incentivize these guys by the same metric, which is maybe ARR? Or do I want to start incentivizing those different teams with different things? Normally, when you're growing and you're at that stage, you want them to be incentivized with specific things. So the guys that are taking care of the existing business, maybe you want them to be focused on upselling, cross-selling, or maybe reduction of churn or downsells, and you want the new business fully focused on selling and acquiring new companies. So that's the way you really need to think about it as you scale. I don't think there's a playbook that applies to everyone. Maybe there's more like guidelines, and every company, every revenue business model, and every moment in time in which you have some objectives matter actually to decide what the compensation plan is. So what I would advise this kind of companies, think through this in that way. And obviously, having a tool like Remuner or many others, what helps you is being able to have some, let's say, technical power on your side while making all those decisions, because the standard or status quo is doing all of that in Excel. And even though Excel is or is an amazing tool, and I'm a former consultant, so I've used Excel for a while, but it's simply too complex for some of those calculations. A lot of them is super time consuming, and specifically, and more importantly, it does not give any visibility or transparency to your teams in real time. And if you want to create the right behavior from them, it's as equal, or it's as important to create the right scheme with the right rules, and then give them the right visibility in real time every single day. Because if they don't see that, then the incentive is kind of gone somewhere. It's in the back of their heads, but it does not create the same impact. So most of the companies that I work with, they are much more worried about the definition of the scheme and the calculation, and they normally forget about really giving visibility and transparency in real time. That's that's maybe the secret source for actually creating the impact that you want and the behavior that you want from them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I 100% agree. And what I really like during our conversation, you keep on coming back on the context of the company. So there is no one scheme that fits all. So this is what I really like, what I would love to bring as a message to the audience as well. So thank you very much, Sergio. Best of luck with Remuner, and we stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, best of luck for you as well.
Thank you very much. See you.
Thanks. Bye bye.